We have our last presentation in this session. She'll be given by Roberto Barbera. We have heard about some applications, some e-infrastructure initiatives and services on this e-infrastructure. I think that this morning we discussed a bit about security, who is accessing the infrastructure, who is accessing the data. And of course, there is an issue of authentication and to ensure that the people who are accessing the infrastructure, have the right to do so. And I think that one aspect of this is very important, and Roberto will talk about certification authorities and identity federation, which is, I think, very important because many people were talking about scaling. If you scale, beyond your institution or beyond even the country, beyond the region, so it's very important, to have these services in place. So, Roberto, you were introduced this morning, so I don't need to do so again. So you have the floor.
Okay, I can use this. Anthony, can use this. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So, in this presentation, as I said, I will try to tackle the problem of certification authorities and identity federations and how and what we did in EI for Africa on these two services. So I would like to start from the e-science concept that has been set since the last 15 years or so. So at the bottom you have, at the top you have virtual research communities that are trying to access data, instrumentations, sensors, and run applications on those data. And data are stored on high-performance computing centers, on research organization centers. And to let the virtual research communities to do so, the concept of e-infrastructures has emerged. Basically, research centers and laboratories where this data are and where this application can run are linked by research networks and are deployed with middleware that let them behave as they were just a unique spread a supercomputer. So the e-infrastructure is key to achieve this. And as Simon said this morning, EI for Africa has come up with a model, with a vision for an African infrastructure in 2020. Several pieces have been described and been tackled by the presentations. Looking at this now and paying attention to the different representation that we had, especially the last three, you can see how these fit into the game. In this presentation, I'm trying to tackle the authentication and authorization infrastructure, and namely, specifically, the certification authorities and identity federations. And partially, I will touch the problem of education and training on these technologies, which, as I said in the panel, is key for the spreading and consolidation and sustainability of the infrastructures. So certification authorities in the world, this is a map taken from the International Grid Trust Federation. And you can see that the certification authorities are organized in what we call policy management authorities. We have TAG PMA for the Americas, we have UGRID PMA for Europe, and then we have Asia Pacific PMA for the Asian countries. As you can see, nothing for Africa so far. An African PMA is missing. I will come back on this important point later on. What we did, how we tackled the problem of spreading certification authorities in the continent. We started from training material, which is essential. So we created training material and we created appliances to easily deploy certification authorities. And we have constantly updated. We have also introduced recently all the framework to manage registration authorities and all the workflow that users have to follow to get their digital certificates and access the infrastructure. And so we have the full support for the CA and RA workflow, and we have the support for the robot certificates. It's a special kind of digital certificates that we use in the Science Gateway to avoid users have to cope with their personal digital certificate. With some communities, this has been a key to let them use, to attract them to use the infrastructure, because asking and managing the digital personal certificates resulted to be a little bit cumbersome for some communities. So in the first year, we already deployed 5 certification authorities inside the entrance. You can recognize there Kenya, Malawi, Nigeria, South Africa, and Tanzania. And Kenya specifically and South Africa are following the process to be officially accredited by the IGTF, by the international organization I mentioned before, to become worldwide accredited certification authority. So KENET, as following this, it's a formal process. You have to write formal documents to describe your certificate, and you have to comply with non-negligible security and hardware constraints, and also people. And it's very important that Kenya thinks that what the importance of the DCA for the community is to let the researchers access the Africa Grid Science Gateway through the robot certificate, and also to deploy grid infrastructure in the country. And the procedure is being done by the EU-Grid PMA, since there is no PMA in Africa, as I said, and this will be over by the end of the year. During the first meeting where these CAs were presented, at the end of the meeting, in the official minutes, we got 3 key messages from EU-Grid PMA. First, we got acknowledged by the work that we are doing in the region to promote PKI infrastructures, and there is a recommendation to create an Africa PMA. So I think that the work done by EI for Africa is so big, I mean, so many countries involved, that Africa is reaching a critical mass, also including the CAs which have been deployed in the Mediterranean Arabic countries in the north of Africa, is reaching a critical mass to deserve an Africa PMA. And third good news, EU-Grid PMA is willing to help and support the establishment of this PMA. Concerning identity federation, first a definition. I like this definition. I mean, identity federation is the ensemble of agreements, standards, and technologies that make identity and entitlements portable across autonomous infrastructures. Basically, using the credentials that are given to you by your organization, you can access different kinds of services, even if you move from your institution, from your organization to others. So instead of having different credentials for different services, you keep only one set of credentials, and using those credentials, you can access different services, like web magazines, like journals, like Wi-Fi access points, and so on. We think that this could be useful also to transform the entire infrastructure in a service provider of an identity federation. So what are they made of? So the identity federation, you have blobs. Each blob refers to a given organization, and you have identity providers betting the identity and providing the confirmation of the identity of the users, and then you have service providers, web portals, basically. The good is that identity federation can be federated into interfederations like EduGain in Europe, but also spawning in other regions of the world, so that if you have a service or in your country, and this is part of EduGain, can be accessed by all the other countries and by all the other identity providers of EduGain. This is the situation of identity federation in the world for research and education. Very large numbers, thousands of identity providers and thousands of service providers, and more than 17 million people holding e-identities, credentials. Of course, as you can see in the non-colored areas, there is a lot of work still to be done to create this, to foster first and then to create and deploy federated identity services. In for Africa, we did this. We started also with training material, with examples, and we managed to deploy 4 catch-all identity providers inside the entrance of Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and Tanzania. And all of them have been connected to the Science Gateway. So this is the 4 identity providers. And we, of course, have one reference service provider, which is the Africa Grid Science Gateway with these applications. And some of them you can see outside. So all these applications, the Africa Grid Science Gateway can be accessed by all people registered enrolled in the identity providers that I've shown you before. And the Science Gateway is now being relocated, as Amos said this morning, to DIT, to be close, to be well connected to the African countries. And you can see some of the applications demonstrated outside. The problem is that what happens tomorrow? Yes, the project has a great success, very good, but now what? We have adopted a DevOps philosophy, so we are blending tasks performed by system administrators and try to automatize them. So basically, we started from the recognition that people have different roles, and we need to reduce the needed know-how and limit the need to know what you want to deploy. We want to have code to execute the infrastructure, not only to run application, but really to execute the infrastructure. Open, and all code is tested so that you can test before you deploy. What we did, we used Ansible, which is a system to actually automatically describe and deploy infrastructure services. And we produce modular services rather than instruction for experts. So we can really deploy, even remotely, the identity providers and other services. So what will happen tomorrow? We can represent the entire suite of services in a version control code, and we can execute it remotely. And we can automate all things, and we can extend this to science gateways and also to certificate authorities. This has been tested. A concrete example, we automatically deployed the catch-all identity provider for Zambian, for the Zambian NREN. You can see here the IDP in the discovery service of the Federation. You can see the login page coming back from, redirected from the Africa Grid Science Gateway. And so we automatically deploy the website having the page for registering users. This is automatic. I mean, this is just one go. So we can do this in many places, in several organizations wanting to deploy identity providers. And then we can easily create federations. So let me summarize. Certificate authorities and identity federations are key components of infrastructures because they enable wide access, still keeping security and traceability for users. EI for Africa has really achieved a breakthrough in deploying these services, and we managed to connect them to the Africa Grid Science Gateways to let users access the infrastructures, and to the Africa and Arabia Regional Operations Centers that owns the playbooks of Ansible to remotely deploy this infrastructure in an automatic way. Besides a big impact, then our developments have also aimed at being reproducible, extensible, and then sustainable. So certification authority deployed are right now in the process of being accredited by UGRID PMA. You've seen the example of Kenya, and others will follow soon. And we now have an executable infrastructure, which is non-negligible, in place to speed up the deployment of these services. Identity services first, and then we will extend it to certificate authorities and to science gateways. So there is no worry to learn how to dig into the code and the instruction and configuration. You can deploy very easily, and then you can go inside the configuration and then understand how the services work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roberto.